Our sort of second panel conversation, but before that we're going to watch a film by Mimi Nicholson, who's a mother of three and an artist living in London, and she holds a MPhil in modern theology from Oxford and a BA in fine art from Goldsmiths, and she has become recently concerned with more the theological implications of performance, especially in relation to Marian iconography, the Eucharistic body, and the act of confession. So that's something we'll be discussing later with Mark Dean, who will join us in the conversation. And I think, having seen the films today, I think there will be a lot to say about mothering the Eucharist, the body, and in relation to Lily Supper's film of the second body, to sort of the image of the iconography of Mary as the mother with child, but also, that the woman carrying sort of the dead body of Christ. Anyway, that's something to think about. But and obviously the Eucharist is the body of Christ. So we'll watch the film and then we'll come together to discuss it.
O glory be to me, Almighty God, our Heavenly Father, who tends to the mercy, gives us the only Son, Jesus Christ, to us the death on the cross, so our redemption, who made there, on his burial, on his social births, a full, perfect, and efficient sacrifice, a blessing, such a blessing to have things of the whole world. It is institute, so in his holy gospel, command us to continue the perpetual memory was that of his vessel death until his coming again. For us, O Master Successor, we must humbly seek. Grant that, higher power, the Holy Spirit, receiving these, the creatures of bread and wine, according to our Son, the Saviour Jesus Christ, holy introducing, in remembrance of his death and passion, and be partakers of his most blessed body and blood, who, in the same night, what he was afraid, took bread, when he had given thanks to thee, he broke it, and gave it to his disciples, saying, Take, eat. This is my body, what has given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. Like Christ, after supper, he took a cup. When he had given thanks to thee, he gave it to him, saying, Drink ye all of this. So this is my blood of New Covenant, what is said, so you and so many, also forgiveness of sins. Do this with us, with ye that drink it, as a remembrance of me.
It's the sacral one. Good job, Mimi. Doing amazing, darling.
Oh,
amazing.
Father, be with me. Lord help. Oh.
O Lamb of God, who takes us away to the sins of the world, have mercy upon us. O Lamb of God, who takes away all the sins of the world, Hamartium Pungus. The Lamb was good. Takes us away to the things of the world. Grant us and peace.
Oh. 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 Just maybe having a wriggle. Good job, baby. Oh. You just keep listening to your body, Mimi.
Yeah.
It knows what it's doing, okay?
Okay.
I'm not going to direct you. You just do what you think you need to do.
Okay.
You might hear me talking in the background, but just ignore me.
Okay.
I'm just saying times and things, alright?
Okay.
That's it. Good, sweetheart.
Ooh.
Really good. Well done. Okay. Okay, so born in the left sacral transverse.
No, it's too painful. You
Held
can do
this
it,
up.
Mimi.
Held this at 1 second. Well done.
Lord.
Go on then, keep going. Umbilicus at 13 seconds. That's it, well done. Go on, keep that going. And again, keep that going. Well done. Good, well done.
Really
Arms at
good.
31 seconds. Well done. And again for me, nice big push. Baby's here. Big push, just for the head. Go on, and again, big push. Keep it going, keep it going, keep it going, keep it going, keep it going. And we have a baby at 45 seconds.
Oh,
Father, help me.
Towel, please, sweetheart.
Oh, baby. Oh, Lord.
Just giving baby a
There's
little
some warm
cry.
towels on your right.
Oh, I feel sick.
That's okay. You
It's
did
a
so
boy, okay.
well.
You can find out
find
yourself
out.
in 3 seconds.
Oh my goodness, it's crying.
Yeah.
Oh,
Reach
baby.
down, sweetheart.
Relax,
Reach
Mimi.
down, sweetheart.
Such a gorgeous baby.
It's a baby.
Very good size.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See what you've
Pop this
got.
pearl round.
A boy!
Congratulations.
Sorry, it's a bit heavy.
Yeah, baby is quite heavy.
Okay, support your arms. I'll support you.
We break this bread to set your body on Christ. Knowing with many, we are one body, because we all share in one bread.
Should we all share this one? I find it quite interesting that we moved to this film. I didn't realize actually after speaking about the mystics and that, that was all the mystic experiences being that sort of experience of the perfect union with God, moving to actually a more a separation, a moment of separation that is the making other, the mothering as a making of the other. And then the Eucharistic prayer, that is what your daughter, I believe, is reading out or reciting in the background, the Eucharist as coming to feed that empty mouth of the baby crying, of the existentially sort of our separation, our moment of separation. There's these psychoanalysts, Nicholas Abraham and Maria Torok, who speak about the community of empty mouths that we are in reference to these moments of existential sort of separation as you separate from the mother in birth. But those empty mouths that have to sort of be filled up first with the mother's breast and then with the mother tongue, with the language. And that sort of the Eucharist is understood in the Christian tradition as being very much sort of feeding that empty mouth, almost like sort of bringing that moment of union, because it's considered to be the perfect moment of union for those who haven't had mystic experiences with the divine is eating that body. And so is how, and this relates to Julian of Norwich's understanding of God as a mother. He feeds us that Eucharist in order to satiate the empty mouths of separation. You do it at, well, I'm going to let you speak, but you also do it at Christmas. That is, again, another kenotic act, moment of incarnation, where God withdraws his divinity in order to make space to the human. That's anyway something to talk about. And the mothering, I also see the mothering as the removal of the mother in order to create sort of a new life, or the empty womb in order to give space to the other, sort of similar to the understanding of kenosis and creation, so the withdrawal of the divine in order to make space for other. So there's another, anyway, that's sort of several things that we can talk about, but I might first we'll speak with, we'll hear you, and then I'd like to, Mark, for you to tell us about how, being a vicar, you felt, or what you thought about listening, hearing those words that you say in Mass with those images. That's something.
Hi, thank you so much for organising this and for having me here. It always made sense to me to link pregnancy and the Eucharist. I think the first time I was pregnant, when no one knew about it, and I had the wafer, which is already such a mystical thing. There's so much mystery going on at that time, so much invisible. To kind of secretly eat it and know that somehow Christ's flesh was passing to this flesh inside me, the resonance was already there. And I think that the analogies aren't an accident. This is a God who created the universe, who decides to give this as a symbolic language of how we understand what his death and resurrection means. And so I think there are so many parallels between Eucharist, pregnancy, childbirth, and just so many salient lines. This is my body broken for you. Though we are many, we are one body. The Eucharist tries to make that a fleshly reality. We're all partaking in the flesh of Christ. That's a kind of bodily participation. And when you get to endure that in pregnancy and childbirth, and there's really that kind of passing on of flesh to flesh, it just deepens that kind of effective understanding a lot, and did for me. And so, and what I think is also really interesting is the practice of artwork in general, to me feels, and this kind of could be a bit heretical, but feels quite Eucharistic. It's this idea of changing materials into something more than themselves, without necessarily doing very much, because to make that into an artwork, Tiger just had to press the button on the GoPro, and that's all that it takes to make the childbirth an artwork. And that's a kind of strange, ritualistic kind of way, almost feels like a magic spell if you think of the Eucharistic prayer like that, of turning materials into something more than themselves. And that is really the understanding of how the wafer, how the bread becomes the flesh of Christ. And people work out that understanding theoretically in different ways, but there's that kind of movement. This was once one thing and now it's another, but it's still kind of the same. And that's really how I understand art, and where that link emerges from.
Mark, do you have anything to say about the Eucharist and mothering?
I think this is a good mic.
That one.
So, should we share this one? Yeah. Well, first of all, nice to see you again. And Mimi's another artist who's worked with us before. I think you've done two projects with us, I think, yeah. So, and it was really great to see that work. What can I say? Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me to be part of this panel. I feel I'm a bit of a interloper, really, because I know that sort of motherhood is the gathering idea or focus of this talk. And of course, I don't know very much about that. I did have a mother, and you're both mothers, I know. And I did have a mother, and you know, my mother, in common with most of us here, I suppose, is the only person in this world that I never met. You know, everybody else I met. I mean, there's some people I haven't met yet, but you know, everyone I know I've met except my mother. I didn't meet her. I came out of her. You know, and there's a there's a very powerful. I consider it an image of God. Actually, it's a text, but you know, this idea that's repeated in Isaiah, and I think in some of the Psalms, you know, that before you were born, I knew you, right? Now, only a mother can say that, really, and of course, God the Father can say that, but it's a mothering image, okay? I mean, because of course God's beyond gender anyway. So, but if we wanted to gender, I would say it's certainly in terms of our human understanding, it's a motherly statement. Because only mothers can say that. I can't say to my daughter, before you were born, I knew you. Although having said that, I mean, sorry, I didn't know how to prepare for this, so forgive me, I'm just going to have to busk this. But before our daughter was born, we or my wife, I don't know, again, can I say we had a miscarriage? I don't know. But I certainly experienced a loss. And for me, it really confirmed and strengthened my faith, because I thought, okay, I've lost, I know I can't prove anything, obviously, but I know how I feel, all right? I feel I've lost a person. I'm grieving a person, even though I never met them. And so maybe I can say before you were born I knew you. I don't know about that. But it's not the same as I know as, like my mother used to say, she had 4 boys, and she said, you know, you're all different. I knew you before you were born. You're all different. You know, the way you were inside me was different. I can't say that, but I know there was a person. And so it strengthened my faith, because I thought, well, if you're a person before you're born, then maybe all the more you'll be a person after you die, right? So anyway, that may or may not be to the point, but I think the Eucharist is very much concerned with these kind of issues, frankly, and you know, and I think that as I understand the Eucharist. You know, I think it's got something to do with Christ's prayer in John, you know, that I am in you and you are in me, right? The other thing I'd say about Eucharist, the Eucharist, is that, well, 2 things really. One just it's kind of technical, but the language, and that's from the book, for those of you who don't know, that's the Eucharistic prayer from the Book of Common Prayer, the Anglican Book of Common Prayer, which I wasn't brought up Christian or religious, but I mentioned this morning, you know, the first church I walked into was one that in religion and art, we ended up doing a lot of work in, which is kind of amazing for me. But it was and remains a church that uses the Book of Common Prayer for its services. It's the old Elizabethan language, which I think is very powerful. You know, I think it's very powerful and gets to the heart of things, I think. So it was good to hear that, so thanks for that. And the other thing, I suppose, just before I pass the mic back on, is just a very simple reminder that the Eucharist is a sacrament. The Catholic Church recognizes 7 sacraments. The Church of England recognizes 2 as instituted by Christ. So that's this Protestant end recognizes 2, but because it's Catholic and Reformed, it kind of many people also recognize the other five, but not as instituted by Christ. Okay, but anyway, it does define a sacrament as an outward and visible sign of an inward and spiritual grace. And I've been thinking about that a lot in terms of looking at the kind of amazing, hope not all of you had a chance to see the video program that we showed earlier, but it will be online. It's also in the room next door, so I really encourage you to look at it because there's some amazing work there. In fact, it's all amazing, really, really powerful work. But you picked up on this, Teresa. There's a lot of layering in it. There's a lot of layering in it, and I think that kind of doubling, of outward and inner, and some kind of meaningful connection between them that is not, that you can't pin down, but you believe is there, I think is reflected in that. But anyway, I'll probably...
I'm just going back to Teresa, of Avila, but how they would call themselves, she was called Madre, no? Mother, by the nuns in the community, but she also decides not to be a mother and biological mother, to remain sort of empty. Something that Simone Weil also decides to do, to remain in hung always in sort of empty and in a state of hunger, to remain in that state. She, for Teresa of Avila, actually, that moment of communion, of receiving and consuming the Eucharist was a moment of union. Simone Weil sort of remains in a state of hunger, of emptiness, in a way, and never accepted to be baptized into the church or to receive the Eucharist in her mouth. But she's known to have spent many hours in adoration and only sort of looking and that paying attention because of this, her idea, that she thought that you have to sort of remain in that desire, because if you fulfill your desires, you'll be destroyed. There would be some sort of violence on the object of desire. So she remains in that state of existential, but also physical hunger. Obviously, she went through many physical pain, and some will call it anorexia, some will. But I don't know where I'm going here. But again, this sort of relation to the Eucharist, to the union with the body of Christ. The mothering, the making other. Let me just find my thoughts, and the remaining empty too, because when you okay, I know where I'm going. When you give birth, you're making other, right, and you remain sort of in that empty state. So that relation to the other has to come from the empty womb, and remain in that sort of space of allowing the other to remain other, and without satiating the desire of consuming the other, right? I think she says, let me see if I find her, but mothering is allowing the other to be completely other and not trying to consume again. So staying in that state of emptiness, and I think that's maybe, by not bearing any of their biological child, that the nuns, in a way, when they do their vow of chastity and they decide not to bear a child, sort of remain a bit in that state of hunger. I don't know what you think about that, but any thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to think about the two different models of kind of feminine devotion to God or whatever as opposites, and they are really kind of seen as opposites, because if you're going to become a cloistered nun or a mystic, and what Simone Weil did is there's kind of this disavowal of of motherhood and marriage, because all of your kind of erotic love has to go to God, and there's definitely a vocation and a model for that. But what I think is quite interesting is that that is also paralleled in a trade-off between motherhood and art. And motherhood seems to be a really hot topic at the moment in art, and Hetty Judah, I think, curated a traveling exhibition a couple of years ago, and there's a book called Acts of Creation. And when you kind of trace the history of motherhood in Western art, you have the Virgin Mary kind of kicking it off, and she's this idealized, fictional mother, virgin mother, which someone pointed out yesterday and really stuck with me. Yes, she is a model of motherhood, but a virgin mother. And then you go to a kind of point where you get this real rejection of motherhood as a way of feminist artists forging themselves in the art world. So these things are seen really at odds with one another. And that then you get, I think it's Judy Chicago, she says, when you have a child, you are no longer free. And you see that kind of repeated a lot of the time as a motif. And what's kind of interesting is that then you have this same idea of motherhood and spirituality. There's, her name's Janet Martin Soskis, I think. She writes a thing about Vei and attention, and talking about how it's always seen, mystical union and that kind of really devout spirituality is seen as at odds with motherhood, because your attention is forever divided and you don't have the time, you don't have the space, you don't have the peace and quiet. But she rethinks attention, and she says, actually, your body and your brain in pregnancy, it reshapes itself. So you become attentive in a different way, and that's kind of going on within you almost by grace, so that so for example, this kind of, your body is preparing itself to hold the child before you even know it. And her argument is, actually, we shouldn't turn away from our affect and our feelings towards others in the world when we're trying to love God, because why create that tension? And I think where Vei comes in here is that she says, because we were thinking about themes of creation and decreation here, and decreation, for anyone who doesn't know, is Simone Weil's funny view. She thinks that God's creation of the universe is an act of self-withdrawal and restraint. So in order to create, in order to make other, he has to, funny language, he holds himself back. And that's paralleled in the crucifixion, in Incarnation, that kenosis, that self-emptying. And she says, an imaginary divinity has been given to man so that he may strip himself of it, as Christ does his real divinity. And I was thinking about that, preparing for this, and how that's kind of what motherhood has done. It's shown me that it is an imaginary divinity, freedom. And if we model spirituality, art making, or even human existence on autonomy, on freedom as unbound to the other, then we get very stuck when we start thinking how to be mother and artist, how to be spiritual and this, that, and the other, all these different things we try to mix together. And someone who's really drawn this out interestingly is Leah Libresco Sargent. And she writes, and I wrote it here, where did I write it? She says somewhere, I can't see it, the untethered self is a unreal self. And so I think motherhood's one way that we're forced to think about this, but there are lots of other ways that we can think about that. And I remember sitting on a bench before I gave birth to my first child thinking, this is my only moment left where I'm free. And I thought, this must be a gross misunderstanding of freedom. When you have a biological child attached to you, you're forced to give yourself over for their maintenance, for their sustenance, and you're forced into that loving relation. But actually that should be my relation to humanity from the get-go, and I think that's what the Eucharist shows, is that that is our relation to one another, and that's how Christ intended it to be, that we are bound in one flesh to one another, that we are not autonomous, that we have to make decisions, be and act in a mode of dependence and communion. And that's why the book that I talked about from Libresco Sargent is called The Dignity of Dependence. And so I think there's lots of really interesting parallels, for example, Merle Lederman-Ukele's her maintenance art. I was thinking about the Eucharist as maintenance art, because you know, you've got this thing where you are baptized, you die, and you're born again, and the idea is, okay, that's it, you're born again, now you no longer live, but Christ lives in me. But yet that's the beginning of your participation in the Eucharist, that slow, gradual feeding transformation. And it parallels so beautifully with what it is to be a mother, because you give birth, you make that other, you have that mini death, the rebirth, all the symbolisms there, and then you have that slow giving over, that maintenance. And that's what love becomes. You know, love is all those things. It's the feeling and the maintenance. Did I have a concluding bit? Well, I suppose it doesn't have a conclusion, the maintenance. That's the whole idea. So,
yes, I think it's interesting, you know, rather than sort of just to talk about interdependence, because, as you said, we have to first be, we are first children of a mother, right? So we are the first ones to sort of cry and in a dependent relation to the other. So if we understand ourselves as that empty mouth, so that I mentioned earlier, sort of being in a dependence, in that vulnerability, in that need of being fed and being given the words that we get through to, you know, some of the writings of the mystics. Teresa of Avila was feeding the nuns as a mother with her words. So if we understand ourselves in that we are also feeding from the Eucharist, feeding from the writing of others, we are sort of in that sort of, we have that emptiness, that we're unfinished, or selves, and so we are in sort of that intersubjectivity. And then we have, obviously, we can feed others. So others are dependent on us. So it's sort of an interdependence in a way. So it opens, it makes us vulnerable too, because we have to place ourselves in that vulnerability in order to well, when we depend, we are in that vulnerability, obviously, the vulnerability of the child, so being the son of the mother, or being... that one.
I like this one for some reason. I don't trust that one. This is so interesting. I just want to come back to I know we're talking about the Eucharist, but if I could come back to the other sacrament instituted by Christ, the baptism, which you just mentioned there, Mimi. Yes, of course, I think, you know, the liturgy does say, and when I baptize it, I say it, that we die to Christ, but I think it's a process, you know. I think it's a process. You know, you see, in order for us to just like die and then be reborn, we'd have to have some understanding of ourselves as more intact and whole than I believe I am and that I feel myself to be, and I've ever experienced any other human being, right? I mean, I've heard it said, and I like this, I've heard it said, so I will repeat it. I didn't invent it, but that Jesus Christ is the only true human that's ever lived. And everybody else is becoming human, right? And that's what baptism's about. And the Eucharist, for that matter. And we do it over and over and over again. It's repetition. We do it in remembrance. So I think that, yes, although it is an event, baptism, and only once. I mean, I hear of people getting rebaptized, and I don't want to get into all that, but I you know, there's only one baptism, and it's a mystery, right? But at the same time, yeah, I think it's becoming. I mean, there's this phrase that in John's Gospel again, you know, but Jesus says, you know, well, I guess it's in the English translation anyway, but I don't know the original Greek. But he says the time is coming and is now here. So there's this notion of a process, basically. A process. But the point is that the process is going in a direction and it is joined up. It's not just kind of random events. The other thing I wanted to say was, and this isn't a really developed thought, but it's something I've been thinking about for a while now, and probably if I had a better brain, I'd have developed it further. But so I'd just like to introduce the idea, which we haven't mentioned yet, I don't think, in any of our conversations, about the fact that in Judaism and Christianity and Islam, there's a prohibition of images, right? And now, how we understand that prohibition is another question, but it's there. Okay, thou shalt not make graven image. Okay, and people can argue about the meaning of graven and all of this, but if we just step back from it, it's a question. I think the interesting thing is there's a question about it, and we should be anxious about that. I think I don't mean anxious, but we should be interested. Actually, we should be interested and concerned. Maybe that's the best word. We should be concerned with this prohibition of images. Now, I had a study leave a year or two ago, and I went to Greece, and I was looking at some icons, but I got very interested in the aniconic, okay, which is kind of to do with the prohibition of images, right? The aniconic, and I just had this thought that because of course the prohibition of images is held in the Ten Commandments, right? It's one of the Ten Commandments, and it's thou shalt not. Okay, it's a thou shalt not. But if you believe that they're given to us for our benefit, okay, then they're sort of positive. And I just wondered whether, rather than thou shalt not, it's like, what if it's I am not? Okay, what if it really means I am not an image? I'm just letting you know I am not an image. And it's in your interest to know that. Because if you think I'm an image, then that will lead you down the wrong path, right? And I think that is basically what the prohibition of images is about. Don't worship idols, don't mistake the spirit for a thing, etc. But if it is saying I am not an image, then it's about an absence, and it sort of starts to point us towards the notion of God as absence, but not in a kind of withdrawn, kind of like disinterested type of God, but absent in our interest. Like, I'm absent when you try and treat me as an image. Okay? I'm not going to enable that. So I think, and those of us that make images, as I said, if you give any credence whatsoever to, the Abrahamic tradition of the prohibition of images, then any of those of us that make images need to think about that, right? Obviously, and as I say, I think this notion of the positive absence is kind of maybe points us towards a way through. I'm not talking about any solution, but just a way forward. And it clearly, obviously, has a lot of coherence with the mystics and a mystic approach,
well, it's a big question, because it's the power of the image that might sort of in representation, something might get lost of God. So it's it also makes me think of the Dark Night, and actually the mystics, in reaching God in that place where there's it's unintelligible, and it's sort of a space where there's nothing, and then they're asked to put their experiences in writing, so translate that moment of no image, no imagination. Simone Weil uses that imagination comes from the devil. I don't know if she uses that word, but sort of imagination has to sort of be, have to be out of the equation if you want a perfect union with God. But and the Dark Night obviously is that space, that dark space without the image, where the union can happen. But then they're all asked to, we're going to finish, they're all asked to write down, and as they write down, they use images. They use, the image of the butterfly or the cocoon or the water or the rain, the candles, so there is a lot of imagery to translate something else, but it's, and it wasn't forbidden in a sense. There's always sort of this poetic sort of imagery in the Song of Songs, and I'm aware of the time, and maybe other people wanting to contribute to the conversation. Is anyone?
That Teresa's own technique, towards the various stages of what did you call the four waters, that she goes through in order to achieve the final one, which is union. And it requires, at the very first stage, as I recall, picturing. Picturing. I wrote an essay on this, which was about how visualization and picturing is very much a part of that passage higher. So picturing is not a prohibition. It's actually very much part of the passage to whatever she's aiming for, which is union. Yeah.
She also used, she actually acquired artworks for the convents, actually. That makes me think. And there is that the moment of one of her moments, not mystical experiences, but strong religious experience, when she looks at where she's contemplating the sculpture of Jesus, Jesus on the pillar, scourged on the pillar. So she does use and buys art for the convents as sort of as a mediation to that to God. So.
Images of suffering, in particular of Christ's suffering, were extremely important in that process. The scourge at the pillar was one of her favorite images to dwell on, to picture and to reflect on or meditate on.
Yeah, I was only going to add that, at least for me, Teresa talks about completely the opposite, I'm sorry, Mark, of what you said about being, and it being the image of God. And her progress on the path towards God is a process of remaking the self, remaking the soul, which is carved and impressed and engraved with the images and words that are shown to her in these sort of visions, and sort of multi-sensory mystical experiences that go beyond visions. And so she is sort of remodeling, retooling the inside of herself in the image of Christ, who is the image of perfection, reshaping herself as an image to mirror him perfectly. And then when she is perfectly Christ, she can enjoy union with God. So it's very, in my mind, it's very material. It's very an invisible inside image that you're constantly remaking and reshaping, and it never stops.
That's what the Franciscans were doing. So that's very much in the Franciscan tradition, and sort of reimagining what, the suffering of Christ was. It's mainly on the suffering they focused on, but sort of reimagining Christ sort of in a very, not picture, but, the humanity and the physicality of Christ. So, Sarah,
it was just a brief comment in response to what Mark was saying around miscarriage. There's a theologian, Karen O'Donnell, who, I can't remember the name of the book, but
Broken Bodies. Broken Bodies.
It's another one, actually. It's on miscarriage.
Yeah, I think Broken Bodies, Mary, the Eucharist, and miscarriage. Trauma theology.
Okay.
Maybe it's not the same one.
She talks about her experience of multiple miscarriages and of the womb as a grave was the image that she used. And I guess for her, reflecting on the tomb of Christ, of carrying both the dead body that hasn't yet passed, but long-term sitting with that image. I just wanted to add that in as well.
I think that was actually, when I was preparing for this, I got her book off the shelf, and there was one thing that really moved me in what she said, which was about how, and this is not to kind of brush over the pain or trauma of miscarriage, but how she, through her miscarriages, came to understand the Trinity much more fully. And the image used in theology for the Trinity is perichoresis, this idea of the kind of communion of three in one, in constant participation with each other, and how inbuilt into that Trinity is a miscarriage, because God the Father is holding the death of his Son, and how, even though it doesn't undo or make sense of miscarriage, it at least offers a notion of God holding the dead body and coming to hold those who are suffering in their time of need, which I found really moving. I just wanted to quickly say about the images and the idea of prohibition. Natalie Carnes, who also writes on motherhood, and she writes a book, Motherhood, a Confession, where she's basically remodeling Augustine's Confessions as a meditation on motherhood. But she writes about images and prohibition and iconoclasm. And what I think the thing she introduces is desire, which I found so useful to think about what an image is. And she makes a distinction between the iconographic and the pornographic. And these terms are not there to say much about the content of the images. It's about the relation. So it's not like a religious face versus two people bonking. She's actually talking about being willing to relate to an image with vulnerability, to let it transform you, and to be willing to let the image as other, transform you. And how, if we view images pornographically, again as a relational category, we are subsuming the image into our own desire. But if it's iconographically, it's taking us beyond, and there's a risk in that, and there's a risk in relating to the image that way. And I think we should actually, that's a paradigm for how we relate to God, how we relate to other humans, how we relate to images, and also for me is how I've learnt to relate to my children, and it's been hard. But they are an other who I have to, who I've made myself vulnerable by extending my flesh into those autonomous beings, but I have to be willing to be transformed by them and the world and God in order to that's the freedom, is that tetheredness, that responsibility, and that's the paradox, and that's really where I think all these things coalesce.
When you mentioned John, you mentioned the dark night of the soul, John of the Cross. I think he said, actually, my spiritual director pointed this out to me just very recently. The darkness is given to us for our benefit, to protect us. And of course, in sort of popular understanding, the dark night of the soul is all bad, really, and it's something you want to avoid. And if you have to go through it, okay, and as long as you live to tell the tale. But but according to John of the Cross, it's given to us for our benefit, which doesn't mean it's easy or anything. But and I think that this unknown, okay, the unknown, darkness, the not seen, the non-image. You know, this dichotomy between the pornographic and the iconographic. The pornography is always known, isn't it? Like, you know what it is, right? And you project. We're back on. You're supposed to project into it, etc., etc. Whereas the iconographic contains the mystery, you know. So again, I think that, you know, I think this idea of the darkness, because for us it's anathema, you know, not knowing. We worship technology, we worship knowledge. We feel insecure if we don't know. We think we feel secure if we do know. And we have to be helped to accept what we don't know, you know. And I think that's what sacraments are about, actually, fundamentally. I really do.
It's 4. So I wonder if anyone has anything to add, to say, to question. Any questions? Well, thank you very much.